Good morning, everybody. We're happy that you're all here. My name is Dan Arbell. I'm a scholar in residence here at the Center for Israel Studies at American University. We're excited to have this stellar panel to discuss and analyze the results of the Israeli elections. In the aftermath of Aluf Ben's keynote address yesterday, there's a lot to go more in depth into. And so there's no better speakers than the people here on stage that can address the various aspects of the elections, what brought these results and their outcome and their meaning and so on. Just a few words of introduction. I'm not going to go into the bios of all the speakers here. You can see that in front of you in the booklets that you all have, but starting from left to right, that doesn't mean politically they're left and right. Natan Sachs, senior fellow and scholar and director of the Center for Middle East Policy at Brookings Institution. Yifat Bitton, she's the president of Achva College in Kiryat Malachi in Israel, legal expert and a social activist, and she's currently now at Chicago University for a semester. Gadeer Mreeh, she's the Jewish agency emissary here in the Washington, D.C. area, and she's a former member of Knesset, first for Blue and White, then for Yesh Atid. And finally, Anwar Mhajne, she is the native of Fachem, and she's assistant professor for political science at Stonehill College in Massachusetts. So before we start, just some rules. We'll have speakers each providing some introductory remarks about the elections, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A involving the audience. So you know that yesterday President Isaac Herzog assigned Benjamin Netanyahu with the task of forming a coalition, and Netanyahu now has 28 days plus 14. Depends on if he doesn't make it within 28 days, although he's aiming to establish a coalition within shorter time than that. This is a culmination of a process which began many months ago, all the way in June. If you talk about Israeli political timetables, in which the snap elections were called, and the elections were held on November 1st. And this comes after 4 election cycles that were occurring between 2019 and 2021. This was the 5th election in 3.5 years. And what I want to start with is with Natan, please, if you could kind of unpack that for us and maybe begin by giving us your thoughts about what was different in this 5th cycle of elections compared to the 4 previous cycles, and what does it all mean? So please, Natan.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, and it's wonderful to be on this esteemed panel of scholars I've heard about, actually, all of you before and wanted to meet. So my job is to just give a bit of data so that the smart people can then discuss it. So this is the 5th election, and in some sense, I think we can think of these elections as a practice of rolling the dice by one person, Benjamin Netanyahu. He rolls the dice one after the other, and if he passes 61 in any of them, game over, he's got it. And he needs it, of course, for his personal reasons, for many reasons. First, he wants to be prime minister. He believes he's the only one who can lead the country. There are about half the country who agree with him. But also, he has personal reasons. He's on trial. He needs it very bad. Now, it's interesting to note that this whole thing started with the first election of 5, when Netanyahu won. The day after that, idiots like me wrote pieces saying Netanyahu won. It was close, but it's over. And I was wrong. And I was wrong because Lieberman defected, as we heard yesterday as well. And also, interestingly, a party of someone you may have heard of, Naftali Bennett, almost passed the threshold, but did not. Had Naftali Bennett gotten 1,300 votes more, so really almost nothing, Netanyahu would have been prime minister. Bennett would not have been prime minister. He'd still be a member of Knesset, probably a minister of defense, and we'd be going on strong. Instead, we saw what happened. Now, of course, there's an imbalance here. Netanyahu needs to get 61 one time. The opposition needs to frantically figure out what to do if Netanyahu falls short of 61, because they are so divided, again, as we heard yesterday. So in that sense, if you look at the slide that Gadeer put forward, she'll talk about it, I'm sure, but we see a tie in a sense, 30,000 vote difference, right? So I'm gonna steal that, right? But it's a tie, and in a sense, it's a rolling of the dice. I remember back in the 1980s, we would watch in Israel, we would watch the European Basketball Cup, it was called then, and I remember it was decided the last second by a three-point shot, and the analyst said, this shows us that it's all about guards, about shorter players who shoot three-point shots. And I remember even then in the 1980s thinking that's a little strange because if the shot had gone out, then it is now European basketball about big players that shoot from the inside, right? So in some sense, we should take with a grain of salt everything I say and everything we analyze about these results because it was a throw of the dice. It was essentially a tie. What did happen? Extremely inefficient allocation of votes on the anti-Netanyahu camp. That's kind of the bottom line of why Netanyahu is prime minister. It's not the only reason, but it's a central reason. Two parties did not pass the minimum threshold of 3.25%. As we heard yesterday, Meretz and Balad, a Palestinian Israeli party. And they didn't pass in part, if you look at Meretz in particular, Meretz and Labor lost quite a few votes. Meretz went down from 200,000 to 150,000 votes. So just from the 24th Knesset to the 25th, that's a quarter of the votes disappeared. They almost all went towards Yesh Atid, towards Yair Lapid. The same with Labor. Labor vote lost from 270 to 175, so quite a bit, and it went mostly to Yesh Atid. The seat shrinkage is less because we had more voters this time. Israelis voted at about 70% voting, as opposed to 67.5% last time, and so actually above 2.5% more. And so votes count less, of course, but mostly what we're seeing is movement within the bloc. Nothing major. We haven't seen major movement from right to left or left to right. We did see very interesting things happening among Palestinian citizens in the vote inside, of course. Balad getting a lot of votes, coming very close to passing the threshold, which is interesting, remarkable, in fact, an achievement, but of course not passing. And so overall, the Arab vote surprised us. There were more voters than we thought, than people on the left feared, certainly. Percentage was high, confounding expectations, but nonetheless, because Balad did not pass, we saw a loss of votes, two whole parties not coming in, Netanyahu was assured the victory. Now, I'll disqualify that too, right? Apropos the three-point shot. Even had they passed, it's not completely clear Netanyahu would not have had 61, because we did see a general rise in voting. We saw a rise, of course, of Itamar Ben-Gvir on the right. I'll talk about that in a second. But we also saw simultaneously a rise of the ultra-Orthodox party, the Haredi party. And that's very interesting because Itamar Ben-Gvir came in with a message of law and order and I would say blatant racism, Kahanism, real successor to Kahanism, but using a ticket of law and order that appealed to many people who are not necessarily racist. And even people who came, we have data of even people coming from the center, even from Yesh Atid and certainly from Gantz's party, all the way to Ben-Gvir. We also know of people, and so, sorry, I'll put on that. So Ben-Gvir rose. What did we expect that to happen, to affect? The main thing is we thought that the Haredi party would go down, in part because Haredim, over time, have become more and more enmeshed in the right wing in Israel. Going back to the 1980s, we had a classical right versus left. On the far right, Gush Emunim, whole land of Israel for the people of Israel. On the left, peace is better than the whole land. Tov, Shalom Yisrael Shlema, peace now in particular, and Labor and Likud in the middle, and then right in the middle, the Haredim. You could sometimes go with left, sometimes go with right. Those days are long gone. The Haredim are perhaps the most loyal members right now of the Netanyahu party. It's always in doubt. Gantz thought he could steal them, but their voters, not necessarily their leaders, their voters are today very right-wing and see themselves, if not by name, then in practice as very Zionists. This is a sea change in the way the Haredi community sees itself politically, and is one of the most important things that have happened here sociologically. Secondly, on the far right, not Ben-Gvir, but perhaps the more important person, his partner Bezalel Smotrich, represents a very new brand of religious Zionism. He is, think of him versus Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett was his leader in the Yamina party prior, and in the Beit HaYehudi, the Jewish home prior. They are very different individuals. Naftali Bennett is what some religious would say religious light. That's not my words, no offense to anyone, but he is from Ra'anana. Again, this should be none of my business, but in a sense it is. His wife wears pants. Again, not really any of my business. No, I'm sorry. I don't mean that in the yellow sense. It says something about, it's also a signal, of course, first of all, that she's her own woman and she doesn't follow his rules. But secondly, that, well, to my point, that would never happen with Ms. Bezalel Smotrich. Okay, Bezalel Smotrich's wife, none of my business, I don't even know her name. She is not, sorry, she is not wearing pants. Now, this matters like it matters the color of your kippah, or whether it's knitted or not knitted, or whether you have a TV at home or not, which is to say it matters a lot. That's signals of what kind of religiosity you have. It's a knitted kippah or not a knitted kippah. Again, none of my business, but it's a very strong signal about what kind of religiosity you are. So in short, Naftali Bennett is a classical, moderate, in religious terms, moderate national religious, very right-wing, super hawkish on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, super hawkish, but very moderate religiously. Bezalel Smotrich is super hawkish on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, very close to Ben Gvir actually, but religiously also very conservative. He in fact represents different rabbis, some of whom are in trouble right now, around what's known as Khardali, which is Kharedi Dati Leumi, a mix of the two. It's almost ultra-Orthodox, not quite. There are women members of the new National Religious Party, but there are clearly rabbinical authorities that they would answer to, and they are far more conservative religiously, but with a strong Zionist and Messianic stance. I need to finish, so let me just say, what does all this mean? Well, I think it very much follows on things that Michael said yesterday. Over these throwing of the dice 5 times, we've had a consolidation of the Netanyahu camp, where all these equivocal ones have shed off. Right, so Gideon Saar, we may remember, was a member of Netanyahu's own camp in the beginning, right? He's a senior minister from the Likud. Elkin was with him, Sharon Eskel, many of them, right? We're all in the Likud. And Naftali Bennett was to the right of Netanyahu, right? Had he passed, Netanyahu would be prime minister. All of them were shed off to the anti-Netanyahu camp, and what's left are either hardcore, ultra-Orthodox, and the new form of national religious, which is much more conservative than the past. Not all the voters, but certainly the representatives. And in the Likud, there are probably quite a few who would have been very happy if this were the scenario, but there are those who have made the Lindsey Graham decision. This is the future of the party, and this is where I'm going. Okay? Whether I like it or not, this is the future of my party, and that's where I'm going to stand. And Netanyahu, therefore, has a very consolidated camp. His partners are very strong. They are very extreme. Okay? I'm from the Brookings institution. We're accused of many things. We're accused of being leftist. We're also accused of being sort of toning down the tone. Everything's okay. Let me just say, they are very, very, very extreme. The alarm bells are completely justified on some issues. And Netanyahu is now the left-wing side of this coalition. He's, of course, the most powerful person, the most experienced. But he's up against some serious individuals who know what they're doing. And I would point first to Bezalel Smotrich of all of them, not Itamar Ben-Gvir. People who know what they're doing and have a lot of power and will try to push things in many different directions. And I think my time is way up.
Thank you, Natan, for setting the stage. And I'd like to, Gadeer, to ask you to kind of give us your thoughts and from the particular vantage point in which you're in. Those of you who do not know, Gadeer has been the first Druze woman as a member of Knesset, the first Druze woman who has been an emissary for the Jewish Agency. She's been a ceiling breaker, a glass ceiling breaker for all of her life, and it's really a pleasure that she's here, so please go ahead.
Okay, hi. It was November 2020 when I came to Lapid. I told him, like we say in dates, it's me, it's not you. I'm deciding to take time out from politics because I saw that we are heading to the 4th and to the 5th and to the 6th election. And I saw how much the political arena in Israel is unstable and it is hard to legislate. It is hard to work when you have no really functioning committees, no budget, no really functioning entities. So I decided to take time out because I saw those numbers and look at the numbers that we have. Those are the results of that that we had 2 weeks ago. 2,330,000, 2,360,000. It's nothing. Israel is divided 50-50. See the numbers. And one person is, you know, the division is created by one person, Netanyahu. The block of the glue in the block of Bibi is Bibi. The glue in the block of anti-Bibi is Bibi. It's beyond right and left. It's beyond the Jews and Arabs and Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, and all those identities. It's Bibi still the persona, unfortunately. So we see those numbers, and it's hard to conclude what is happening in Israel in 7, 8, 9 minutes, but we will try. Many factors contributed to those results, and I believe, the major event was the Guardian of the Walls May 2021 major event since the second Intifada, seeing in shared cities, not mixed cities, I call them shared cities, in Haifa, in Jaffa, people attacking each other, killing each other in the street because of religion. It was so dangerous. It was so serious. I predicted that. I warned. I was an anchor woman. I was a journalist. When I was interviewed as a politician, I saw those divisions. I saw the ramifications. When you talk about different groups in Israeli society, this is the result. And suddenly we saw that people are asking about identity, about national identities in two groups, Arabs and Jewish Israelis. Who am I? What is my national identity? What is my personal identity? It was an event that shaped those results that we saw. And in recent years, many things happened in Israeli society, dramatic changes that happened slowly, but we see the results. In 2018, the nation state law, Israel, the Israeli Knesset legislate a basic law by saying that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people, which we agree, we respect, we know that, but the state refused to ensure equality, civil equality. And I am coming from the Druze community. I belong to the minorities in Israel, and I'm still telling you that people are still talking about identity. Just a moment. Am I considered to be a B-class citizen in the Jewish state, or A-class citizen? Who is the state of Israel? It's still something that people are asking each other, who am I? What is my identity? And going back in recent years to the rhetoric about groups, me and you, they are. Do you remember the famous short video of our Prime Minister Netanyahu, our current Prime Minister, talking in 2015? In the election day, Arabs are going in buses traveling to vote, by targeting his sector, by saying to the Jewish people, come and vote because we and they. And so those divisions, the rhetoric, the policy, the systematic policy that we saw in recent years brought those results that, and the rupture of, sense of belonging, what is happening in the different groups in the Israeli society. I say that mistakenly. Some people, especially in Jerusalem, still think that Arabs, it's like a homogeneous group. Arabs, no. We have Bedouins, we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have Druze. If you want to dive more in a high resolution to understand the characteristics of each group, Bedouins who are living in the north of Israel are totally different than the Bedouins who are living in the south of Israel. Some of those living in tents, still, the loyalty, the sense of belonging, the challenges, the way of living is so different. So it's important to understand the dramatic changes that we have among the Arab sector in Israel. And now we have those results. See especially the three red arrows representing the three Arab parties. Suddenly we have not one joint list. Suddenly we have three Arab parties, even just to run for politics as a separated party, each one, it symbolizes how much they are evolved. Now, if we talk about national identity, how much there are differences among the Arab sector. What Sami Abu Shahada did, on the one hand, you can say it, wow, they are mature enough. There are differences. On the other hand, they waste more than 130,000 votes in this crucial timing of maybe we will have 50-50 or 60-60. It was a huge mistake, in my opinion. On the other hand, having Mansour Abbas with the United Arab List, what he did last year was amazing by saying, I have my strong identity, but I want to play a major role in Israeli politics. I want to be an integral part, and he succeeded in that in very short time. They had no time to prepare for all those campaigns and for all those elections. So having two of them last year and this year and succeeding to bring 5 mandates, it's dramatic. And it's important to understand what is happening, that we have many Israeli Arabs that saying we want to be equal citizens. We want to be Israelis. We want to be integrated. We want manufacturing sites, academic institutions. We want to close those gaps and to work together. So it's important to understand those three parties. Of course, we don't have merits. Merits is the symbol of the left, 30 years after the establishment of merits, seeing merits is out, it's a strong indicator that Israeli society is heading to the right and unfortunately to the extreme right. I believe that we need to ask, many questions, tough questions, but two questions we need to ask. First question is identity, who we are as a society, as a state. The state of Israel, are we talking about liberalism? Are we talking about conservatism? Are we talking in the collective level about a Jewish state or a democracy? By the way, I believe that we can have both. I call it the healthy tension. If we can succeed, and when we have brave leadership and strong leadership, we can succeed to have this sensitive balance of having both a Jewish state and a democracy when we are seeking to survive in the next century as the state of Israel, and also in the individual level. How I identify as a Jew or as an Israeli, because it's totally different. I lecture in campuses, universities, I work with students, and when you ask them, you are amazed to see the order of how they identify. And of course, some say, okay, it's the end of the liberal Zionism, it's the era of anti-liberal, aggressive Zionism, good luck for us all. Yeah, I'm afraid. I'm telling you, I'm afraid because I believe that we are heading toward a dark future. The public discussion last week, I'm sure you are following media, is if Israeli soccer teams can or cannot, should or shouldn't play soccer on Shabbat. Excuse me, Israel in 2022, are we in the Middle Age? So it's just one, we call it in Arabic, the siftach. It's the introduction of, I'm afraid, what we are going to have in the near future. The second question is to ask, where are we almost 75 years after the establishment of our state, the state of Israel? Our Declaration of Independence, especially Chapter 13, that I rely on when I worked in media, in politics, in everything I do. This is what I see. Chapter 13, our Declaration of Independence, especially those lines, Israel will ensure complete equality of all of its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. Where are we? 75 years after that. So those questions, we must ask ourselves who we are. And if we seek to survive in the next century, we need to have answers. And I hope good answers for those questions. Thank you so much. I try.
Thank you. Great job. Anwar Mhajne, please. You have a presentation here, but also we're hoping to hear from you more about the Arab trends and sentiments in the Arab community in Israel regarding the elections as compared to previous ones, and how you see this playing out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Anwar Mhajne. I'm a fifth column, according to our next prime minister. So I'm telling you what, I grew up in Al-Fahim. So I come from a Muslim town. Al-Fahim is the home of the northern branch of the Islamic movement. I went to high school at the school that actually was supported and funded by the Islamic movement, Al-Ahliyah, which is a private high school. Even my psychometry, which is like, that's like SAT that you have here, I was trained by an institution called Iqra, which means read. That's the first, like one of the verbs, like one of the verses in Islam, Iqra, which is read. And now it's banned. So I'm telling you, like all of that makes me stand as a fifth column. Now, I also do study religious movements and religious groups. I do have a focus on the Muslim Brotherhood. I know I have an Egyptian friend here. But I did it because I was also curious about the Islamic movement in Israel. And we can talk more if you have questions about that. But today I'm going to present you not only with my view, I'm going to present you with various views about voting in Israel, so for and against voting in Israeli elections. And if you noticed, I used PCI/Arab voting. PCI stands for the Palestinian community in Israel, and I put /Arab because not every Arab identifies as a Palestinian, right? So I'm trying to be cautious and respectful of that. I don't like to put labels on people when they're, when my feminist training teaches me to listen to how people identify. Ari, אתה שומע אותי? Can you hear me? Okay, I'm checking with you because I know you're having trouble with it. So Arab voter turnout fluctuated a lot throughout the years, right? I'm going to show you a table that will give you a better understanding of the numbers. In general, usually the voter turnout among Jews has been higher than among Arabs, with the exception of the early years of the state. Fascinating, right? We didn't even have Arab parties until like 1992, 1993. I divided into the scholars who study Arab voting in Israel divided into 4 periods. So the first period is from 1949 to 1973, Yom Kippur War. Under that, I don't know if you're familiar with the military rule that Arabs had to go under until 1966. So it was a military government that governed Arab issues. And then the average voter turnout during that time, which is fascinating, they voted for satellite parties. It was 83.8%, which is higher than the national average. Now we're at 54%. What happened? Right? It's fascinating. And we'll discuss this more. The second period is 1977 to 1993. And that's the period from Land Day. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Land Day. It gets commemorated every year. So what happened was in 1976, the government tried to expropriate land, about 20,000 dunam. I don't know what that is, translates in acres or I don't know, but it's a lot of land. So in the villages of Sakhnin, Arbell, and Dir Hanna, and people came out and protested, and a few people were killed. So that marks Land Day, right? And it's commemorated every year. Now, 1993, we're close to the Oslo Accords, right? Some people had hopes for it, but we know it was a disaster. And we can also talk about that. So average voter turnout during that period stood at 72.4% compared to the national average of 78.9%. Still higher than we have today, right? Third period, 1996 to 2013. A lot has happened. Netanyahu, baby, Habib Shab. So he becomes a prominent figure in Israeli politics. But in between happened, so we had the 2000 events, October 2000 events. Now that was during the second Intifada, but one of the events that marked or was very important for the Arab community was when about 13 total, 12 that were Palestinian citizens of Israel were killed. And even though there were reports and Badato and like all the recommendations, nobody was really fully held accountable for the killing of citizens who were protesting. And I was really young during that time. I'm not going to expose my age, but I remember clearly when the demonstrations happened, I was like, it's still clear in my vision of what happened. And when I show you the numbers, you'll see that the voter turnout dropped drastically after that event. The fourth period, of course, 2015, and you can include 2022 now. And that's when we see first the joint list formed in 2015. A lot of people think that it was for them. I mean, the reason is because the the threshold was increased to 3.25 instead of 2%. I think that was beforehand. So Arab parties came together, even though ideologically Arab parties really differ from each other. I mean, you have a communist party with a nationalist party with an Islamist party who disagree on a lot of questions like women's rights, like LGBTQI rights, right? It's not only about national issues, it's not only about the Palestinian cause, but other issues. I think Mansour Abbas famously, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said, I do believe in the two-state solution, but on issues like LGBTQI and like on social issues, I'm closer to the right wing. He's closer to religious Zionist parties than he is to kind of, leftist Arab parties that believe in LGBTQI rights, that do push for equal representations, right? So that's when we see a notable decline in Arab turnout. So it was average during that time around 56.3%, which was confirmed recently was about 54%, right, in the recent elections. Now, I think Natan said we were surprised at the the amount of Arab voters. You were surprised. I was not. So the fascinating thing, and what I think the polls get always wrong, is about how Arabs vote. First of all, I call my sister. It's like, hey, did you vote? I still have till 10 p.m. to vote, right? So that's one. People rush, but things happen slowly. Second, WhatsApp groups. There were groups for voting and against voting. Instagram posts for and against. When people were noticing that the voter turnout was 70% in the Jewish community, it was higher, everyone was freaking out, right? Let's go vote. Then Ben-Gvir comes and he says, I want the Ministry of Interior, right? Police. All right, that's another thing that was scary, right? So we see that there was that move that, okay, the voter turnout is high. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are becoming a real threat to us. Even though if you ask some people, they'll say, well, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, it's just they're telling us what already exists. These are facts. We deal with them every day, right? If you ask my brother, he works at the airport, and he's like, every time there's a political unrest, I lose a contract at the airport, right? Or I'm prevented from going inside. So there's all of that. And I have here the national voter turnout, the Arab voter turnout. And if you notice around the like 2000 area, that's when we see a huge drop. But of course, in between, we have the joint list coming together, they split, they come together again. And we see that in April, for instance, the voter turnout dropped to 49%. And that's when the joint list split. But then in September, they came together, they increased the voter turnout. And then 2021, that's when RAM split the United Arab List and ran separately. I'm going to show you this video. It's only less than a minute. I thought it was a very strong video showing the argument against voting and what it is to be an Arab citizen of Israel, Palestinian citizen of Israel. It's going to be really loud. I hope it's not too much. I don't know how to turn the volume down if it's too loud, but here we go. There's English subtitles.
التمييز مرفوض وحشية الشرطة مرفوض التصويت على الرأي.
I thought that was a very powerful video showing quotes from people in Israel about Arab citizens of Israel, what they listen, what we hear, what we grew up with, right? I don't know if you were able to read the subtitles really quickly, but it is for boycotting the elections. Now there's a second camp, and just to highlight that discussions about voting or not voting began in the second period of voting that I spoke about. But also, if we talk about it, it's very popular among Islamists as well. So, like for instance, if we talk about Ram is representative of the southern branch of the Islamic movement, and then we have the northern branch of the Islamic movement that refused to participate in national elections, and they split because of that in 1996, right? Sheikh Raed Salah was like, no, I'm gonna focus on civil work on like the Holy Land, kind of Holy Land. I can't remember the name of the organization, but what they do is like they go to Al-Aqsa Mosque, they do a lot of civil society work. And that was a big dispute between the southern and the northern branch, and that resulted in the split between them to participate or not. And eventually the northern branch participated in municipal elections, and they eventually stopped as well. So that's an interesting thing to look at municipal elections versus state elections as well. I don't want to like take too long, but this quote also from intellectual Palestinians who didn't want to vote, and they use Audre Lorde quote: "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." And I'm quoting, I'm bringing these things from people, like I've been really keeping up with what people are posting online. I think it's fascinating. So that's another argument for it, but against voting, but for voting, there's a coalition for voting, and that's one of the reasons they say like you need to vote. First, they say, regardless of what the circumstances are, we shouldn't give up. We shouldn't like raise our hands. The second one, nobody's gonna hear our problems if we didn't vote, right? So we need Arab representatives to deal with Arab issues. So for instance, when Arab students were stuck in Ukraine, we approached Arab Knesset members to come and help, right? So a lot of these day-to-day things that you need representation in the Knesset for, that goes beyond just like national issues. Then they're saying that diversity of parties, regardless of their ideology, is important for our own people. So United Arab List, the Communist Party, the Nationalist Party. And then they're saying we have a long way and we have lots of difficulties, but we shouldn't give up. So there's like lots of explanations to get people to vote. I know I'm going over. Ben Gvir was the star of the campaigns to go vote. Like, go vote. And you know, if you like, if you were curious, I can send you some of these Instagram pages because they're fascinating. The coalition that is responsible for it, it's called coalition, like Arab Coalition for Voting. There's a link for the organization. And then last but not least, this is in Arabic, but it just shows the kind of the breakdown of Arab votes. You see the United Arab List gained 30,000 votes this time. Al Jabha, they lost some points, and a lot of people were impressed with the performance of Balad. I know Gadeer mentioned that, you know, you lost votes because you're not translating into seats, and there wasn't like a voting sharing agreement that could have been done, but they didn't do that because of internal splits between these two different groups. It's about power sharing, it's about seats, it's about also issues, ideological issues. But Ram responded to what people want. A lot of polls showed that Arabs or Palestinians in Israel, Arabs in Israel do want to be influential and be in decision-making seats. But I think I want to end here because I took way more over my time.
Yeah, we'll get to some more in the
Indeed.
Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you. Yifat Bitton, last but not least, and from your vantage point as a professor of law and also the issue of identity, which you focus on quite a lot, so be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Michael, and the university for hosting this important conference. So it is, I remember yesterday that you said in the opening that it was very timely in the sense that, well, you know, every time is a time for election, or it used to be this way, right? How many more elections Israel can handle? The answer is now, like, there's not going to be another election in the near future. And the question is whether Israel is going to be handling this fact, the fact that there's not going to be, and how it's going to be handling this fact, in the sense that what we eventually have is this very troubling coalition that has been formed. And I want to draw your attention to a group, speaking of identity and the issue of identity as taking such an important part in what happened in the last five election cycles. So I do agree with Gadeer that it has a lot to do with identity, but not just the one relevant to the you know, national rift between Jews and non-Jews, mainly, of course. I'm saying non-Jews because I'm trying to be cautious as you were, but also within the Jewish population in Israel. So if we're looking at numbers, the numbers indicate that the fourth round in which Netanyahu finally lost, as opposed to the first three rounds where he did not lose. He was not really winning, but he was not losing. But the fourth round where he lost and the new change coalition was able to form was because of around 200,000 Jews that didn't go voting. That's the truth. And these people went out voting this time and gave him this, you know, landslide win. And this group was the group of Mizrahi Jews living mainly in underprivileged towns. So clearly when I talk about Mizrahis, what the counterpart within the Jewish community is the Ashkenazi group of Israeli citizens. And you know, I'm going to be very brief about the definition. So we divide between those who have a European ancestry that are deemed here as Ashkenazis, and those who have a Muslim countries ancestry, such as myself. My parents immigrated to Israel in its early years from Morocco and Yemen. So this rift that is being overlooked and in a way denied not being able to burst into the center of politics in Israel is always there, and it's what made the change here in the elections. And so here we have the numbers very clear. So it's not about, like getting into sociology and to definitions, sociological definitions of Mizrahis and Ashkenazis. The fact of the matter is that Mizrahis in the underdeveloped towns were those who did not vote then, voted now, and made this win for Netanyahu. So I think what's important and interesting in this respect is to try and understand why they did that. So the Mizrahi population in Israel is always accused of, voting against their rational way of thinking of politics, voting against their own good, because it is very clear that within the almost 40 years of Likud party ruling or being in government in Israel, their status has not been dramatically changed. Some of them were definitely able to get into the middle class in Israel, but when we look at the more persistent elitist institutions such as the academia and the legal system, where I stand, where my friend here, Metal Pinto stands, and it might be a bit confusing because Michael has invited both of us here, so you might get mistaken that this is how legal academia and the legal world in Israel looks like, but it couldn't be any further than that. So, so I think that the thing is that when we try to rationalize their voting, when we look at these two institutions more specifically, there's a lot of reason in what they did. I'm not justifying, but thinking from a reasonable point of view when you analyze the elections results. And you were mentioning in the formal panel that only in 2004, the first Arab citizen of Israel has been nominated to the Supreme Court. When it comes to a Mizrahi justice, the first one was nominated only 3 years earlier. So do not get confused about how problematic this rift is and how, and I'm not doing a rating here, God forbid, between a comparison between how discriminated Arabs and Palestinians in Israel are and how Mizrahis are. It is very clear the Arabs and Palestinians are crucially and on many more levels and more distinctive and crucial levels are being discriminated against, but this is not the issue. The issue is that there's another group here who suffers from systematic discrimination, and this discrimination is being denied. And what happens every election and again is that this group goes out to show its power in almost the only time that it has an opportunity to really do so. And if we think of the left, and I'm getting to the end of my talk here, if you think of the left in Israel and what it resorts to, okay, it resorts to two institutions. One is the legal system, the Supreme Court. Like our greatest worry as of now is what will happen to the Supreme Court. And the other one is it resorts to the other institution, is to academia, to science, to trying to rationalize and have the Israeli prosperity have a substantial hold in science, mainly if we think of the startup nation and startup economics in Israel. And these two institutions couldn't be any more problematic when it comes to the discrimination against the Mizrahi community in Israel. I myself was nominated to the Supreme Court in 2016 and 2018. I was the first Mizrahi woman to be shortlisted to the Supreme Court. We've just recently had a nomination of a Mizrahi woman as a justice, but she's of course not identifying herself as such. So these things happened within the right wing of, dominance of Ayelet Shaked. I've been put there by Ayelet Shaked herself. So that makes you wonder how politicians play out this tension. And when it comes to academia, as I said, as Dan said before, I'm heading a college, an academic college in the south of Israel. And I can tell you that in many respects, what was meant to be the means to enable accessibility to those in the periphery of Israel is actually a hierarchical type of academic system where you have the universities, very heavily funded, very prestigiously held by society, whereas in the colleges you have, very little prestige, very little money going to these students, and the hierarchy is kept there as well. I do my best, of course, to change things, but I'm the only Mizrahi woman who's a president of an academic institute in Israel. There was only one before me. He was there for a year or so. We barely have Mizrahi men managing to get to these high levels in the Israeli academia. And the last point is that ideologically or conceptually, the left resorts to liberalism as it's invoking liberalism as, the savior of us all from what's going to unfold due to the conservative coalition. And again, Gadeer and her beautiful presentation that Natan took some of it to himself, so I'm stealing a bit as well. So she was indicating that the rift is now between conservatives and liberals. If this is the rift, then we're doomed. I'm telling you, demographically, we're doomed. What I'm looking for, and because I'm the last one, I'll bring some optimism to the floor, and I am optimistic, is a rift between liberalism and traditionalism. And I think you referred to it as well, Taylor. So if we're looking at traditionalism as some kind of venue whereby we can meet both liberals that are moderate liberals in the sense that they're not against everything that is religious and so on and so forth, we can find there the Mizrahi group, for example, who's highly traditional, but is not at all conservative in the way the Ashkenazi religious Zionists are, and are very different from them in many respects on a lot of issues of LGBT, of women's rights, stuff like this that are definitely relevant to their way of being and to their voting or to their ideologies that come from a very moderate type of living that is diminishing in Israel exactly due to these rifts that we've seen now in the elections. Thank you.
So we've heard four very interesting perspectives on the results of the elections, and we don't have that much time, so I do want to start right away with the Q&A, and I'd ask those of you who are interested in asking questions to stand up, identify yourself, and ask your question. Don't have a question mark at the end, not a monologue. And also, I'd like to give AU students the first stab at it. So I welcome anybody that would want to, any students that want to ask questions. Why don't you go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question. I was very,
Your name, please?
oh, Danielle, I'm a graduate student here at AU. I was very interested to see in the results of this election, both Ra'am and Hadash Ta'al got 5 seats. And it's interesting that they, were given the same mandate by the voters, given that they have very different strategies in engaging with Knesset and with, the Jewish state at large. How do we understand this rift? As you said, Arab voters aren't a monolith. How do we understand their decision-making here between parties that have said that they will continue to work with the Israeli government to get resources and things like this versus a party that will not engage and wasn't even invited to opposition talks by Lapid, as we heard yesterday? How do we understand that calculation in the Arab vote and where that split happens?
Want to go in more?
Yeah. So, okay. Balad is the one that is more on, I'm not going to even recommend, Benny Gantz or recommend anybody to the government. Balad is on the other side of the spectrum. Khadash and, with Ayman Aoudeh, he positioned himself as a leader a few times and attempted a few times to be influential. Now, with the United Arab List, what's fascinating when I looked at people who voted for them, which I didn't mention, first of all, the voters voted for the least percentage of voters for Ram or the United Arab List was in mixed cities or shared cities, as Gadeer said. I think it was around 17.5%. And the rest was like 48, 42 between the other two parties, which is interesting to look at that. But also there are people who are not religious who voted for the United Arab List, which is fascinating because it's not about religion, it's more about engagement and influence in the government and budgets and all of that. When it comes to Khadash and like true partnership, I think what happened with Khadash and I think what happened with Balad Sami Shhadi, I've listened to his talks. I actually think he's a very smart guy. His language is amazing. Like I study post-colonial literature. I study all these scholars in the US talking about settler colonialism, and I know his language is directed toward people who are intellectually like understand what that means, right? But if it's your day-to-day basis is like, oh, I need a job, I need to go to school, I need funding because the towns are dirty and I can't, you at the end of the day you have to make a decision. And you notice that the people who voted for Balad tend to be more at least from the groups of people that I know, they're more educated, they're more involved, they travel, they have connections, while the people who vote for Khadash, some of them really believe in Jewish Arab partnership, but it has been proving very challenging. Like when did we have, and you mentioned like them not being invited to the opposition talk. I don't think that was their fault. I think it's really not efficient not to talk to them, right? You're alienating thousands and thousands of voters who voted for them. That's a problem. It is a very serious problem with the opposition. That's why we have a weak left in Israel, really, because what is a left in Israel, really? What does that mean? Define the left in Israel. It's really beyond the definition of what we view as left in the United States. And I've been living here for 10 years, so like I can speak a lot about that. It's totally different terminology. It's totally different beast over there. Because if you're not going to talk about a two-state solution, well, I mean, Lapid mentioned that, but if you're not going to actually address these concerns in a way that is public and actually is left in that sense, how are you different from Bibi Netanyahu in a lot of ways? And that's what voters would tell you. And I've spoken to a lot of them. A lot say Yair Lapid, or I mean, some people would disagree, but Yair Lapid or Netanyahu, why would we care? It's the same result, right? Netanyahu funneled in funding to the Arab community as well. But like he still was racist, used polarization, right? To divide and conquer. And that's a problem in itself. So the voters are very strategic in the sense where they align, and the Arab community is very diverse. We tend to label them under, oh, they're only for like that, they're only looking at the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue is very important to me and a lot of people, right? First of all, whenever there's tension on the other side, on the other side of the border, well, there's no border, the green line, whatever that means, then we as a community feel it because racism like translates to any like tension translates to us on daily basis. Second of all, let's say there are two-state solutions. What will happen to us as Palestinians, Israel or Arabs? Some people anticipate, like Hanin Zarabi always said, our situation is going to be worse because then they'll say, oh, go to the other state if you don't like it. At least that's the assumption that she's making. And I'm just translating the thinking of different people about what's happening. It's not my opinion yet. I haven't given my opinion on all that, boycotting or not. I'm just kind of translating what's happening on the ground. And then the other issue is with the May events. That was like a very serious situation. And every time we like talk to people, like I can't even go to work. I'm scared, right? Like I heard that my mom wouldn't let my siblings to go to work. They work in Tel Aviv. They work in, a lot of mixed cities, and they do businesses even in settlements, which is fascinating too to discuss that. But they're like, I'm afraid I can't. Like when my brother was in Bnei Brak when they were sending signs saying don't hire Arabs, right? So that's a problem. And I was in Ben Gurion University during a situation where we had Kaslit operation, like other operations. And I know how whenever there's tension, you feel it on your skin. It's very, very tough. And the other thing, if I, as an Arab or Palestinian citizen of Israel, I talk about two national states or a binational state, as somebody who lives in the U.S., I am very weary of nationalism, very weary of religion. I'm very weary of all these like things. In my dream, it would be I'd like an equal state for everyone, right? But I'm not delusional, right? I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, or if it's even possible. However, why can't I promote human rights and citizenship of other people? Why can't I be against the occupation of Palestinians who I share history with? Why can't I talk about my history, the Nakba history, which is part of my family? Like my grandma was 2 years old when that happened. It's not. We all have family members who still remember what happened. Why can't I talk about that? Why can't people carry the Palestinian flag when they think it's like, why is that a big threat to you? And every time the state tries to erase it, you see a push for actually more Palestinization of the identity. In the school system, yes, the curriculum doesn't even teach you about these things, but you know what? People will come and do extra activity, and civil society organizations will come and re-educate you. And I remember that clearly, like we learned the history. So when it comes to that, there's the daily thing, there's the day life to life issues that shape voters' turnout or which parties they vote for. There's also the national cause, and it depends on what's happening at the time. What's the political context at the time? What's the discourse at the time, right? Arabs are voting in droves. Of course, we're going to go vote in droves because you said so, right? So we are going to vote in droves. You're trying to put cameras. I don't know if you saw the it was a report by Channel 13 about how Netanyahu actually tried to discourage voters to come and through funding from, I don't know, like I think it was through funding from a businessman in the US in the States. So people hear about these things, they're like, no, we're going to go and actually vote. But so for some others, it's like, okay, we voted, we wasted our time. This is the fifth election in less than 3.5 years. What I'm doing is legitimize a system that claims to be democratic. Because every time we use if somebody uses apartheid, if somebody critiques Israel for their treatment of the Palestinians, they're like, well, we have Arab citizens, right? We're a democracy. And for a lot of people who are against voting, even for any of these parties, they're like, I'm not going to legitimize the system. Is it efficient? That's a question, right? It's a different question. But that's kind of the representation of why we have different people voting for different parties. And even like it's equal 5-5, like that's very close. And Balad almost passed. I mean, it was 2.9%, I think. They were shy a few thousand. Yeah. So it just showed, first of all, the diversity of the voters, the different concerns, the political context and climate at the time, as well as kind of who's encouraging people to vote. There was one election, I think the one before this one, where mosques were involved and they're like, go vote. And a lot of people also don't look at the religious institutions and how they play in mobilizing voters last minute as well.
Gadeer, do you want to add something to that? Or you're fine. Okay, please. Yes, Sophie.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I am an Israel Studies minor and I work for the center. I guess my question is, there's like an extreme level of voter fatigue. People are obviously not excited to vote. And I guess in this election, we've seen a lot of extremism. Do you think it's becoming strategically necessary to get people to vote by being more extreme? Or are we going to see a shift away from that?
Anybody want to take that?
It's a complicated question, and it's related to many factors. Extremism or nationalism is a global phenomenon right now. We see it not just in Israel, and we are not dealing domestically with it in our society. We see it in Europe, we see it here in the US, the tendency to prefer nationalism rather than democratic or liberal values. And this is something that is happening everywhere. I was there when I had 3 campaigns, 3 elections in 2 years, and people were tired to hear politics. People are not interested, and guess what? People don't understand in politics. They don't dive. They don't have time to read, to explore. They don't know how you legislate. They don't know how you voted. They don't read why you came to politics. They vote relying on one thing: do they love you? Do they like you or not? Everywhere, this is psychology of how people think about their leaders. So we see extreme. I even don't like to call them leaders, because to be in the extreme side, it doesn't matter for me in the left or the right. You symbolize something that cannot combine or cannot include the other, which is very problematic when we are talking in the moral, in the basic humanitarian level. So we see those extreme voices everywhere. And yes, people are tired, but unfortunately, and I am coming from media, when you start or you open the news, your opening item, Ben Gvir, so good luck. So when you are running for the prime time, when your reason, if you want to have this person to be interviewed or not, relying on how much money then I will have as a classic media, what is happening in social media is totally different, much more dangerous. But yes, we see it. People prefer to hear more the fundamentalistic radical voices and the disinformation, the fake news. It's a huge mess. Look what is happening now in Twitter, the dialogue of who is controlling what, the check and balances. Do you think that a professional, a young man sitting in Twitter office, I don't know where, can control if Biden / Trump / Bibi can tweet / film / publish any post or any story? So those are questions that now we are facing, and unfortunately we are responding to those rapid changes that is happening to the media, to the classic both and new media, and to politics, because even the definition today are changing. Who can tell me if Benny Gantz is center or right? Who can tell me if Likud is much more right? There are many changes even in the definition of who is right and who is left in Israel.
Thank you.
Can I
Yeah, please.
add on this,
sure.
maybe another take on this? So what we see is that eventually it is clear that when the public is confused with all these recurring elections, it's going to be easier for these extremists to catch the public attention. But at the same time, and here again, I'm optimistic, because I think that there's a huge gap between what these leaders, in a way, okay, I'll take your caveat on that, what these people represent and what the people who voted for them were really seeking or wishing for. So in this respect, I can go back just for a second to my own experience. In my college in the South, I always, like I'm referring to my students, we have 90% of them are women, okay? And 35% of them are Bedouin women coming from the South Bedouin community, as Gadeer introduced them before, as much more discriminated and in a lower socioeconomic status than those in the North, and the community of Mizrahis from underprivileged towns of the South. And I can tell you for a fact that what we have on our campus is voters for Ra'am and for Likud and Ben Gvir. That's probably the population. There are almost zero altercations between them. They live together, they study together, they work together on many projects as students. Maybe part of it is because they're women. I truly believe that there's a relevance to that, but also to the fact that there's a huge difference in Israel between what you vote for, who you vote for, and what you stand for. And that's a lot of, there's a lot of optimism there, I think, for Israel as a state, and mainly for civil society organizations in Israel and non-governmental and not necessarily, you know, non-state related organizations, because my college, for example, is funded by the state, but still it's a civil society entity eventually, with women living next to each other, having like the greatest rift between them from a political point of view, but from a civil and humanistic point of view, they are like, all they do is live together and exist together, and they're happy together, because I can tell you this as well. It sounds like a promotion, but truly, I'm just proud of them, and also proud of my staff in the at the college. We came in first in a national survey for students in student satisfaction from their own academic institution. I think this is also a great way of showing how comfortable and safe they feel, all of them, on our premises together.
Yes, Natan?
Just 2 points. So first of all, you can donate to Achva College Fund. The second is, you should, not you can, you should.
That was to you, refer to you.
Amazing. I just say, yes, they're tired. Everyone would be tired after 5 elections, but 70% voting is not low in comparatively, if you think of the world. And I'd add to that in Israel, citizens who are not present in the country on election day cannot vote. There's no early voting, no mail voting, and no voting from abroad. And there, yeah, well, exists. And the third is that there are a lot of, comparative to the size of the country, there are a lot of Israelis abroad, citizens, right? So there are a lot of Israelis in LA and New York, in this room. There are quite a few Israelis abroad. And so that means that it's not really 70%, it's significantly higher than that. And it's not so low. So I have to admit, I take, from five rounds, same question again and again, no change, nothing moving. Actually, Israelis remained extremely engaged. And the last point is that it's over, right? We're not looking at election 6, barring a surprise, which could always happen. Never say never. The past, exactly. The past year and a half have seen the strangest things in the world, so never say never. But we're looking now to return to some kind of normality. Normality in Israel would mean around 3 years until the next election. Who knows? Could be an intifada in the middle. There could be many things that could change that, of course. But so by and large, I have to admit, despite, of course, fatigue, which is obvious, I actually take a bit of the opposite lesson from the numbers.
It's interesting also, The Economist has this democracy index that they publish annually, and they recently did theirs. And Israel was 100% in political engagement, right up at the top there with Norway and a few other European countries. So it's interesting to just add that. Please, any more questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Aryan. I'm an undergrad student taking Professor Brenner's class. I just wanted to know if, now that we do have Netanyahu in power, with the religious Zionists and the Shahs as coalition partners, how may this affect the potential economic trajectory of Israel? We do have them wanting to, close down various public works, various jobs on the Shabbat. Especially with high inflation, we have a looming recession on the rise. How may this potentially affect, Netanyahu's relationship with the religious Zionists, as well as those with, people like Sheldon Adelson?
Natan, you want to try that? Or
I will help you. We see the numbers that are coming now from Israel to double the budget for yeshivot. We are talking about 2.5 billion. We are talking about, if we are talking about gaps and discrimination, about the Haredi sector, about core issues, about curriculum and learning math and English. So okay, now we will see much more huge gaps in the long term, because, if you see your budgets, if you will have I believe it's 1,315 shekel for the monthly for each one. Why to go out? Why to learn, to study, to work? It is much more powerful to sit at home or in the yeshiva and to pray We see voices and we hear voices among the religious / Haredi sector who are saying, no, it's bad for us. So Netanyahu, it's going to be, אומרים בעברית זה ימין מלא מלא, it's 100% right, but believe me or not, it is going to be very challenging government for Bibi, who will try to control and to say, hey, it's me the boss. And because he see also the image of Israel and how the world is reacting to having Smotrich / Ben-Gvir in as ministers, and not just as, you know, as in very important positions, like even the financial ministry. Do you know what does it mean to control those huge budgets and to decide who is going to cut the cake and to give whom what? So we are talking already about things that is going to be in the coalition agreements now, and we see the numbers. So it's going to affect them, but badly.
And I think it's also interesting to know that from a historical point of view, Netanyahu was the first Minister of Treasury who cut on budgets to these people, to these ultra-Orthodox communities, and it was very effective in the sense that there was an increase in the labor force, in their participation in the labor force. You could also see it in with Lapid's leadership on the Ministry of Treasury. So now what you have is Netanyahu, who is very rightist conservative from a financial point of view, economic point of view, but then at the same time knows that this is what, like, you know, spreading the money or showering the money on the ultra-Orthodox community, that's what would bring him his recurring victories. So in this respect, it's going to be highly political to decide to provide them with these means. And again, from the academia, Israel is investing a lot of budgets and endeavors in bringing Haredi community into the labor market in a not in a very smart, efficient, or not in a very efficient way, but at the same time, these kind of steps might be halted by the leadership, because as Arbell said, there's also a differentiation between what the leadership for ultra-Orthodox community wants and what people on the ground say that they need and want. So this might be, again, that they will have to just, you know, be shattered from this new path that has been paved for them in the last few years.
So I think it's a good question. I caution that we should separate two different elements of it. One is a very important long-term question of the structure of the labor force and the economy in Israel. And there are two populations who are underrepresented in the labor force. One is mostly the Muslim population, not so much the Arab, but specifically the Muslim, and of course not all of it. And second, the ultra-Orthodox one, especially the men. And the question there is a crucial one. It's absolutely vital for the long-term economic question. It will less affect the macroeconomic indicators that you're going to see in the next few years. So it doesn't mean that if we appoint X, Y, or Z, or if there's more budget for the yeshivot, we're going to see the macroeconomic indicators change. Partly it's already baked into the way Israel operates, and partly it's just not usually that sensitive to that. It's more sensitive to headwinds from the world, and there's a lot happening, of course, in the world that will affect it. So I think a very crucial question is who's going to be the finance minister. Is it a finance minister? It could be Aryeh Deri from Shas himself. It could be Bezalel Smotrich, who's in fact very right-wing economically, unlike Aryeh Deri, who's left-wing economically, and will not be mean to the ultra-Orthodox, but does not come of them. And that would be very important in that regard. And secondly, I think a very important question that's a bit more subtle, you know, even under Netanyahu, before all the political mess began, there were large plans and projects of investment in the Arab sector in trying to get the labor market, higher labor participation in the Arab sector. And that is extremely important for the long-term trajectory of Israel and of this community, of course. And that happened in the Ministry of the Treasury by the bureaucracy, but was permitted to do so by more or less, some of it at least, permitted to do so by the political echelon. Who is the Minister of Finance will affect that. I would suspect that Aryeh Deri would be happy with that. And I suspect that Netanyahu would be happy with that, or at least if no one talks about it, he'll be happy about that. because he knows it makes sense. He just doesn't want anyone to accuse him of, God forbid, helping the Arabs. So if Aryeh Deri is there, it may happen. Tzad Smotrich is a very different story. I don't know how he will fall. He may decide that it's good for the economy and therefore will do it. He may decide that his ideology forbids him from doing these things. I just don't know. It's a big, big question, and I think an extremely important one. Honestly, I care a lot about the yeshivot and all that. It's very important, but I think there's a lot more leeway for government investment to affect the extreme underinvestment in the Arab sector, and that is where the finance ministry can make these kinds of decisions, not alone, but it is the crucial node. So we'll have to wait and see who's the minister and how much leeway he has.
Thank you, Natan. So now,
Just
Laura.
one sentence, if
Oh,
I can.
yes.
Natan, there I know is talking about 1 billion direct vouchers. Yeah, it's the symbol of what the direction.
Okay, please, Laura Cutler is going to be giving us some questions that people online
have
were sending.
One
Oh,
from
one,
Yehuda
okay.
Lukács, at, I think, Maryland, who is an alum from here. You were just talking about the economic implications of the Haredi population. This question is, and was talked a little bit in the first panel. Various demographic projections, including the Central Bureau of Statistics, point to a dramatic increase in the Haredi population in the future. It's estimated in a few decades, they'll constitute about 40% of the total population. If these projections are true, what are the electoral implications of this? You just talked about the economics, and I didn't know if anyone wanted to say anything more about the electoral implications.
So yes, I would go back to my last comment in my talk, that I think that as long as we look at the division between liberals and conservatives, as I said, the demographic it couldn't be any clearer. So the electoral results are predicted already, and what happened here was just that it arrived like a decade before we expected it to happen. But this is very different if we'll look at the other divide as a potential, as some kind of a third space of traditionalism, where people that are more at the center of Israeli society can come together, and there the demographic effect will be felt clearly, but I don't know, maybe in 2 decades from today. So this is not necessarily that the doors are closed behind us and that's it. What we have to have is these new collaborations and bridges between the people in the center of Israel, and there are many of them. And by the way, when you mentioned originally that it used to be that that ultra-Orthodox parties were set in the middle, it's not very true. The only ultra-Orthodox party that went with the left was that of Shas, of the Mizrahi ultra-Orthodox community that went with Rabin at the time. So I'm not sure we can go back to these days, but we can work on the basic ideas that enabled this partnership so many years ago.
Okay, Natan?
Demography is very crucial, and we can see it also in the election results. I'm not belittling the point. I think it's an important point, and it's very crucial to the future of the country. I would just point out 2 things. The first is that there is an undergrowth of the Haredi population if you think of the birth rate. So the birth rate would suggest that already the ultra-Orthodox should be much, much higher. And there seems to be a large movement, probably relatively gradual. There are people also move from ultra-Orthodox to secular. That happens. I know quite a few, but it's not a massive number. Mostly you would see people shifting within the religious spectrum, and quite a few people who are national religious who take off the kippah. The next chief of staff of the IDF doesn't wear a kippah, but he studied in a religious school, for example, close to where I grew up. This is a very common thing, especially where he grew up. It's a very common thing. So you have this kind of trend that can affect things in the long term. The second is that, and this I think very much follows on what Yifat said, what is ultra-Orthodox and how they live and how they express themselves politically, but also economically, can change. And in particular, in a society in which they are a much larger share of the population, I wouldn't be surprised if they are much more active members of society and economy in a bigger way. And it's already true compared to the past. You know, when I was a kid, the Haredim were somewhere on some reserve. That's just not the case anymore. They're everywhere. They're even in the middle of secular news, you know, and in your industry, you can see them on prime time speaking to secular people on a TV that works on Saturday. They won't maybe speak on Saturday, but it will appear on Saturday. So
You can see the women, by the way, the ultra-Orthodox women, the real revolution that happened there in terms of their education, mainly higher education. Again, what I think will happen is that they will push more to a more moderate and more participatory Haredi community than we used to see when they were in the homes. And that was it.
Well, this has been really a fascinating discussion. I really want to thank all of you, and I'd like the audience to join us in thanking speakers.
Thank you, Dan.
We can go on for hours talking about the implications of the elections, but I think everybody's ready for lunch. So thank you all for coming, and have a good afternoon.